សួស្តីអ្នកទាំងអស់គ្នាបានស្គាល់ពីកម្មវិធីទូរស័ព្ទផលរបស់ Prudential នៅតោះមកមើលបន្តិចមើលថាតើផលអាចជួយលោកអ្នកយល់ពីរោគសញ្ញាបានដោយរបៀបណាខ្លះផលស្ទើរតែនាំមកនៅមុខងារថ្មីមួយគឺ Symptom Checker ដែលអាចជួយឲ្យលោកអ្នកយល់ពីរោគសញ្ញារបស់ខ្លួនកាន់តែច្បាស់ហើយណែនាំអ្នកទៅកាន់ការថែទាំមួយដែលស័ក្តិសមជាមួយនឹងបច្ចេកវិទ្យា AI ថ្មីលោកអ្នកអាចទទួលបានព័ត៌មានអំពីរោគសញ្ញារបស់អ្នកបានយ៉ាងឆាប់រហ័សជាដំបូងអ្នកអាចបំពេញព័ត៌មានមួយចំនួនអំពីខ្លួនអ្នកផ្ទាល់បន្ទាប់មកគ្រាន់តែប្រាប់ពីរោគសញ្ញាឬអាការៈរបស់អ្នកទៅកាន់មុខងារ Symptom Checker ហើយឆ្លើយនឹងសំណួរផ្សេងៗជាមួយនឹង Chatbot របស់យើងដោយបានឆ្លងកាត់ការត្រួតពិនិត្យពីវេជ្ជបណ្ឌិតនៅកម្ពុជាមុខងារ Symptom Checker នឹងអាចប្រាប់ពីបញ្ហាសុខភាពដែលលោកអ្នកអាចនឹងមានហើយណែនាំអ្នកទៅកាន់ការថែទាំមួយដែលស័ក្តិសមទាញយកផលឥឡូវនេះហើយសាកល្បងប្រើមុខងារ Symptom Checker ដើម្បីទទួលបានព័ត៌មានសុខភាពគ្រប់ពេលវេលា
This is Comtech Summit 2021, powered by Prudential, live in Phnom Penh, Kingdom of Cambodia.
A very good morning to all our digital audience and welcome to day 3 of the 5-day event of Camtech powered by Prudential. Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, Prudential is an Asia and Africa focused business and have made rewarding impact of climate change, a key pillar of their ESG strategy. They have been advocating for policies and standards to accelerate financial in energy transition in developing markets in a fair and inclusive manner. Now joining us to present financial energy transactions in the developing markets, let us all welcome Kerry Adams-Strump, the Director of Group ESG Prudential Plc.
Good morning. I'd like to start by thanking the organisers for their passion and dedication in putting this one-of-a-kind summit together. I'm pleased that the technology allows me to be able to speak to you from London today. Prudential is an Asia and Africa-focused business. We serve 17 million customers across 15 markets in Asia and 8 in Africa. We're also one of Asia's larger asset managers with over $250 billion assets under management. As a significant asset manager and asset owner in regions forecast to be severely impacted by global warming, Prudential has a distinctive role to play in the transition to a low-carbon economy. Therefore, when we refreshed our ESG strategy, we made stewarding the impacts of climate change a key pillar. Earlier this year, we committed to decarbonise our portfolio of assets held on behalf of our insurance companies, with the goal of becoming net zero by 2050, with a short-term target of achieving a 25% reduction by 2025. As we make progress in executing our strategy, we're advocating for financing energy transition from fossil fuel to clean energy in developing markets. Through my talk today, I'd like to provide an introduction and overview of the state of private capital financing towards energy transition in emerging markets. I will highlight some of the main issues that limit the flow of capital that need to be solved. I will also point to some of the emerging solutions that are coming out of COP26. Let me begin with an overview of the climate change and energy transition problem for developing markets. In 2015, at the Paris Climate Summit, there was broad consensus among scientists and policymakers that if global warming is not kept to below 2 degrees, preferably 1.5 degrees by the end of the century, it will fuel extreme weather events throughout the world, with spiralling impacts on economies and societies. For the Mekong region, this would mean an increase in frequency and the impact of floods. This will disrupt lives and negatively affect the economic development of the region. To keep global warming well below 2 degrees, atmospheric concentration of CO2 and equivalent greenhouse gases must be kept below 450 parts per million. However, in 2019, concentrations were already 500 parts per million. Therefore, world leaders and decision makers who are currently gathered in Glasgow in the UK for COP26 will need to agree on actions to ensure these ambitious carbon reductions are met. Any ambitious target will need to be equitable, sharing the burden between developed and emerging markets. It must be what is known as a just transition. This is because developing markets have contributed far less to the total stock of CO2 equivalent greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. As of 2019, Africa's contribution to the total stock is less than 3%. Asia, excluding India and China, is 14%, whereas the United States is at 25% contribution. While Asia and Africa have contributed less to the carbon stock, they are often disproportionately affected by the impacts of climate change. In addition, they are often more dependent on fossil fuels for their energy supply, but with fewer resources to finance the transition to a low-carbon alternative. And at the same time, they have the greatest unfinanced basic development needs. They still need to provide 760 million people access to electricity, and 2.6 billion people lack access to clean cooking solutions. It is clear that a just and equitable way of financing the energy transition in emerging markets is urgently needed, and financing that transition is an important part of the solution. Emerging markets need $1 trillion per year in clean energy investments in order to put the world on track to reach net zero emissions by 2050. However, clean energy investment in emerging economies declined by 8% to less than 150 billion in 2020. And to meet the need, this amount would need to expand 7 times. The good news is the average cost of reducing emissions in emerging economies is actually estimated to be around half a level in developed economies, but boosting finance to the required scale demands a wide range of instruments and approaches. So what is holding back the flow of available capital into financing the transition in emerging markets? Only by recognizing the problem can we work towards a solution. To date, various factors have impeded the movement of finance to support the transition. Many of the current measures and regulations are more successful in disincentivizing fossil fuel financing than incentivizing finance for the transition. The private sector is being asked to spontaneously finance a global public good. It's an externality. And that's not what the private sector does, because it can only in fact finance what is commercial. So it needs mechanisms such as perhaps carbon pricing to meet the scale of projects needed for the transition to be financeable. Beyond this, the investment in public goods is sometimes above the risk appetite of private capital. And that's where the public sector and multilateral development banks have a role to play. An opportunity exists here to turn billions of public capital into trillions of private capital by scaling blended finance, catalyzing standalone private capital flows, and building new markets. There's also the issue of disclosures. Without international engagement and cooperation, the multitude of voluntary reporting standards and developments within the ESG and sustainability space across the various jurisdictions will impede the efficient and equitable funding of our efforts to move capital to where it is most needed. In addition, there's not enough ESG data across investable opportunities in Asia. To give you an example, Prudential has recently invested in a renewable energy bond in Vietnam, guaranteed by a mechanism under the Asian Bond Market Initiative. Prudential is keen to support the Vietnamese government's goal of developing its renewable energy sources in the country. However, because of the lack of ESG data, we were unable to obtain a green bond certification, even though it would qualify if we had the data. To overcome these limitations, we need consensus around some basic frameworks that investors, companies, public sectors, and multilateral development banks can use to collaborate and fund energy transition in developing and emerging markets. Practical solutions are emerging. For example, the launch of the Energy Transition Mechanism Partnership. This is a public-private finance vehicle that aims to reduce coal-fired power generation through accelerated plant retirement and boost the growth of renewable energy. This has the potential to enable developing countries to make a transition away from coal to renewable energy without sacrificing other development needs. Don Kanak, chairman of Prudential Insurance Growth Markets, developed this idea based on 30 years' experience in insurance and asset management and climate change issues in Asia. This concept is now in the pilot stage with support from the governments of Indonesia and the Philippines. So let me conclude with some recent positive developments that can help overcome some of these issues that we've highlighted and give us hope for the future. Last week, the I4S Foundation announced the establishment of a new International Sustainability Standards Board, which can be seen as a first attempt to give companies a unified framework for reporting climate and other sustainability risks. This is a critical step forward. There's also China's new commitment to carbon neutrality. In September this year, President Xi announced that China would be carbon neutral by 2060. This could be a global game changer, as China contributes 30% of global carbon emissions. Last week, India announced that it would be carbon neutral by 2070, and India contributes 7% of global carbon emissions. Last week in Glasgow, global leaders at COP26 agreed to end and reverse deforestation within a decade, and also to cut methane emissions to 30% by 2030. In conclusion, as greater consensus and ambition emerges across all major developed and developing economies, there will be cascading effect across the financial markets, and this will help overcome many of the gaps that currently prevent private capital from being deployed to finance the energy transition. If the issues are resolved, alliances like the Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance, of which Prudential is a part, and which represent $10 trillion in assets under management, would be able to accelerate their investments in an energy transition in emerging markets. This would help countries get on track to delivering the ambitions set out in the Paris Agreement at COP26 and beyond. Thank you for your attention. Enjoy the rest of the summit.